All right, so I'm going to talk to you about the psychological experience of dealing with an early breast cancer diagnosis and treatment. I'm a psycho-oncologist, just sexy language for a clinical psychologist who deals with cancer-related distress. I'm going to talk to you from three perspectives: from the psycho-oncology theory, from my clinical practice, and from my personal experience. Many years after starting working in cancer work, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2018. So I'm 5.5 years early breast cancer. So I'm 5.5 years down the track. They're my contact details. If you get to the end of this and you think, oh damn, I didn't get the contact details, that's all right. Just put my name into Google and they'll pop up. Before I go any further, I am not a touchy-feely psychologist. I am not very zen. I am fairly direct. I don't pull any punches, which is sort of efficient and I guess useful, but it can also mean that I cover a lot of pretty hard material in a fairly short space of time. That can be triggering. So if you get to the end of today and you feel like, oh, that's brought up some stuff and I'm feeling a bit rattled, then I really encourage you to just debrief with a trusted friend, family member or GP or someone else like your breast care nurse. Apart from Neil's exercises, if you only take away one thing today, it would be this. This is the timeline of a cancer experience. So look at the bottom of the tile and it says diagnosis, and then you can see the treasure map, and it winds up through hospital-based treatment, which for most people is months to years. And then it talks about this thing called post-treatment adjustment, which lasts at least 2 years and often a lot longer. Post-treatment adjustment cuts in at the end of hospital-based treatment. So for a lot of people, at the end of radiation. For some people, it's like the end of chemo or surgery or whatever. But it's a time, just like Wendy referenced earlier, when all of that routine, lots and lots of appointments, lots of caregiving behaviour, lots of eye contact, lots of hi Charlotte, how are you feeling today, all of that evaporates. And it doesn't evaporate gently or it doesn't dwindle, it like comes to a crashing halt. And then it's like, oh, now I've got to kind of rebuild my life, figure out what I'm going to do next, who I am, what this all means. And I've lost my safety net, I've lost my scaffolding, I've lost all of that lovely protection and buffer. And so the next 2 years, that post-treatment adjustment period, is a time when you psychologically and physically rehabilitate. You don't feel the same through the 2-year period. You ebb and flow and you get better and you adjust. And if you never see a psychologist, you will still adjust. Sometimes seeing a psychologist speeds up the process a bit. But this is the part of the cancer experience that is largely unspoken. And that's fair because when you are diagnosed and you go into that very rapid, staging scans and then treatment and then side effects and then appointments and so on and so forth, nobody's talking to you about and then what's going to happen further down the track. Everybody's focus is on the here and now. Your focus is on getting through the morning or the afternoon or just getting through this treatment and surviving. And then you get to this post-treatment adjustment phase, and that's usually when I get most of my referrals because it's when people kind of fall into a hole. And they go, oh, I'm not coping. I've been coping with all of that horrible treatment and now I'm not coping. Like, what's going on? And it's because during treatment, all of your psychological system is on hold. You are in survival mode. And then it's like someone takes their finger off the pause button and all of the meaning of everything that's happened, all of the diagnosis stuff, all of the treatment stuff, all of the prognosis stuff, all of the fear of recurrence stuff, it all kind of like hits you like a tidal wave. So if you feel like you've had something like a post-treatment adjustment experience, then that's normal. It's not very pleasant, but it's normal. And for a lot of people, just understanding that can be quite helpful because nobody's usually put a label to it, explained it to them, much less to their family members and friends. I'm 5.5 years down the track. I'm still figuring this stuff out. So when I say 2 years, I mean, plus. To explain how we feel psychologically, I use this stool analogy, not that sort of stool. If you think about always gets a laugh. If you think, imagine if it was that sort. Anyway, if you think about the seat on a stool as your psychological well-being, yep, your psychological well-being is usually supported by a few legs on your stool, and those legs are usually about 5, sometimes a few more, but at least family, friends, hobbies and interests, work or volunteering, and physical health and healthy lifestyle behaviours. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that a cancer diagnosis and treatment can take away the legs on your stool. And so what happens as those legs either disappear or get whittled away is the stool seat tips. It becomes less stable. So your psychological well-being becomes less stable. So if you at any stage have felt a bit unstable through your cancer experience, then that's why. And again, normal but unpleasant. So I'm going to talk to you today about common psychological issues in a cancer experience, and this is in an early breast cancer experience. These are the topics I'm going to cover. I could talk here for 8 or 9 hours, God help us, so I'm not going to. So I'm going to cover a fair bit of information fairly fast. If you want more detail, you'll be able to go to the podcast and you can get basically an episode in every single one. So what I'm going to cover is diagnosis shock, emotional isolation, relationship issues, body image concerns, a perspective shift, and post-treatment adjustment difficulties and fear of recurrence. So D-Day, diagnosis day, which for me was the 23rd of July 2018 at 5:30 p.m. I will never forget that moment. I can't remember the conversation, but I will never forget that moment. It's kind of like then my life got divided into, it was kind of like before cancer and everything since. And it's not like that for everyone, but it is like that for a lot of people. There's this concept called diagnosis shock. And for a lot of people, it sets off a fight and flight response. You've probably all heard of fight and flight. You get a big adrenaline surge. You feel like you're getting ready to kind of either flee or kind of like take on a big fight. It can mean that you feel what we call the somatic symptoms of anxiety, which is the physiological stuff that comes with anxiety. So you can feel a bit sick in the tummy, you can feel a bit like dry in the mouth, a bit lightheaded and dizzy, sometimes get the shakes, sometimes feel like you've got to go to the loo. A lot of people get all of those. Some people will just get some of them. I know for me, in that first week after diagnosis, I lived on soda water and coffee. I couldn't eat. I was so anxious. I was waiting for all the results of the staging scans. And it was a good weight loss strategy. I think I dropped, 3 kilos, but that's not how you want to do it. Information control is a very common response in diagnosis shock. It's kind of like when everything is spiralling out of control, sometimes we go, well, what can I control? And if all I've got is information, like what's happening and who can I tell what to when, then sometimes that's what we do. And other people around us can find that a bit weird because it's kind of like, well, why don't we just either tell everybody or tell nobody? And it's like, well, no, I'm going to be the arbiter of who gets to know what when. And that can be hard. Usually it settles down after a few days. You've plunged into a situation where there's an instant change. Literally within minutes to hours, you're having to confront things like lots of medical appointments, the possibility of things like treatment starting almost straight away. You've got to figure out what you're going to do with things like work or kids or money or pets or parents or all of those things all at once. And you are thrust into action mode. You've got to do stuff. You've got to make decisions. And for most people, you haven't got any experience of dealing with stuff like this. So if you have felt like it's kind of like you've been put upside down into a washing machine, well, that's kind of what it's like. Emotional isolation is one of those experiences, and there are a few that I call a universal experience in breast cancer. It's the feeling best described by the words, they just don't get it. If you're surrounded by people, and often people are surrounded by loved ones who obviously love you and they obviously care and support you, you can still feel like they just don't get it. If you're on a desert island and there's no one else there, well, it makes sense that you're feeling emotionally isolated because you look around and it's like, well, there's no one here. No wonder I feel kind of like all alone. But if you're surrounded by people who clearly are rooting for you, I've got your best interest at heart, really care about what's going on, it can feel quite weird That it's like, I've got all of this support, but I don't feel like there's anyone really understanding what this is like. I feel actually quite alone in this experience. We call that emotional isolation. This is where I say empathy is gold. So empathy is that opposite feeling where it's like you just feel like other people get it. And I think in this room, like if we had an empathy-ometer, we'd probably have it nice and high. Empathy is that feeling of like when you're talking to someone who gets it, you almost don't have to finish the sentence because you can see reflected in their eyes that they know what it is you're going through. You don't have to persuade them or influence them or educate them because you know they're already there with you, and it's an incredibly supportive, powerful experience. So if you find it, go to that place again. And if you haven't got enough of it, then places like BCNA are a really good source of empathy because you can connect online and in person with people who have or are going through a similar experience. And that can make you feel so much less alone. And importantly, it can change the expectations that you have for other people in your life. Because if you're getting your emotional needs met by empathetic others, then you don't necessarily go looking for it from other people who can't give it to you. And that's good, because if you keep going to people expecting them to give you something that they just don't have it to give, then all it's going to do is set you up for disappointment. With emotional isolation, there's this common cycle. So, top right corner, when you feel emotionally vulnerable, you seek emotional support from others. You might do that behaviourally, but often you'll do it just emotionally. You'll be looking for it. When you fail to locate or receive that emotional support, you feel hurt and disappointed, so you emotionally withdraw. And where does that leave you? Up the top corner, feeling even more emotionally isolated. Now, people look at this and then go, oh, Charlotte, are you telling me then I need to go back in and keep trying? And I'm like, yeah, no, don't do that. Because your brain won't really let you do it anyway, because it will be protecting you and it'll say, no. If that person's let me down or if those people have disappointed me, I don't think it's a really smart idea to keep going backwards into that space. But what it is important to do is acknowledge that you are emotionally isolated and that you need to look elsewhere for that emotional connection and empathy. So empathy gives you validation, it endorses your experience, it gives you that feeling of they get it. People who really are empathetic, they sit with you. They sit with you in your distress, they sit with you in your uncertainty, they sit with you in your puddle, and they don't dismiss it, they don't challenge it and say, we can work with that or we can get over that, and they don't try and fix it. They just let you be with it. They acknowledge it. They say, that must be really hard for you. I get what that's like. But it's also important to understand with empathy that if you're connecting with other people who have lived a similar breast cancer experience, it's always good to remember that everyone's breast cancer experience is different. So just because something might have worked for them, or somewhere or someone or some treatment might have worked for them, or they've had a particular response to a situation or a circumstance, it's not absolutely certain at all that you will have an experience that maps onto that. So empathy is great, but it's also good to understand that just because someone gets my experience or I get theirs, it doesn't make our experiences the same. Relationship changes. So these can happen in all sorts of ways. Friendships, with colleagues, with family members, with children, with parents, with intimate partners. And they can happen all of those at once or just some of them. Surprises and disappointments, again, a universal experience. So many of my clients, and me included, have felt both beautifully surprised by people who we would never have expected, who stepped up particularly during treatment, but sometimes afterwards as well, in ways that you just can't really believe. And then also everyone's had at least one of those disappointments where people have just kind of vanished, gone missing, or really let the team down. My husband is a legend, and he had a friend of 45 years. And that friend had been to dinner at our place every week for about 20 years. And I got diagnosed and that friend disappeared. And to this day, we don't understand why. And my husband's a clinical psychologist as well, so, we tried all the tricks. None of them worked. He asked, he was explicit, he wrote a letter, he had 2 meetings with this guy, we did everything, or Rob did everything. It didn't work. We felt incredibly hurt, incredibly angry for 6 months. Every time we drive past their house, I would make a rude sign for 6 months. And then after 6 months, we drove past their house one day and Rob made the rude sign and I didn't. And he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, I've made a decision that I'm not going to give them that much power. I said, if that was all, because it was this bloke and his wife, I said, if that's all they were capable of, if that's the limit of their friendship, of their compassion, then I don't want to sound like a dick here, but I almost feel sorry for them. Because if that's all they could do, then they actually weren't who we thought they were. They weren't our people. Or maybe they were our people for that time of our life, but they're not our people for this time of our life. And I said, I don't actually like the feeling that I have when I make the rude sign. So I don't want to be that person. I don't want to give them that power in our relationship, in our house, in our life. And so we both agreed that that would be something that we would change. And it was interesting how over probably the next 6 months, what was anger, which has power, dissipated to indifference. Now, it's not 100% indifference, because if it was, I wouldn't be talking about it, but it's a lot more indifference than it was power. And that feels so much better. So sometimes working through the disappointments and kind of getting yourself to a place where it's kind of like, well, I can't change the fact that it happened and I can't control other people's behaviour. All I can do is look at my response to that behaviour and what it does to me as a person, and then think about, well, is that working for me or not? I don't want to make it sound like I'm a saint. I'm no saint. Oh, sexuality and intimacy. Ooh-wah. Hormone blockers. Mate. So for those of you who've been in menopause anyway, for those of you who have or are enjoying the rigours of hormone therapy, or for those of you who have just found that cancer treatment, body image stuff, how you feel about your partner, relationships generally, has affected your sexuality and intimacy, you are in good company. It is a big deal. It's not talked about very much because it's a bit ick, and it shouldn't be, because it's a really important part of relationships, part of functioning, part of like getting back and reclaiming some sort of new normal. There are a couple of things that are really important in intimacy for women. One is lubrication. So some of you would understand that when you don't have estrogen, God, who knew estrogen was such a thing? Mate, they should talk about estrogen in primary schools. Like it's so good, except that we just don't know it's so good until we don't have it. And so anyway, I digress. So when you don't have estrogen in your body, all of your membranes in all of your body become thin and brittle, yeah? And that includes the membranes in your vagina. And so if you think about what happens during sexual intercourse, penetrative intercourse, it is part of what happens in penetrative intercourse is this, yeah? It's friction, yeah? Now, if you've got lubrication, if you've got estrogen, if you've got moisture elasticity in your vaginal membranes, you have less friction. So you've got, if you like, you've got that happening with a bit of lubrication between. So when things like pieces of flesh push against each other, there's a bit of lubrication between, so it doesn't hurt, yeah? That's what sex used to be like for me, yeah? Now, with no estrogen, unless I bring in the lube, If there is no lube, then it's that. You've got friction. And guess what happens when you have friction? You get pain, you get burning, you get tearing, you get bleeding. What happens when you have that? You get no more sex. Yeah? So I think I should have shares in the lube companies because I have lube everywhere. Lube in the bathroom, not at work. That would be gross. Lube in the suitcase, lube at the river shack, lube everywhere. And it's one of those things that, like, whenever we're going anywhere, like, we have learned the hard way that we have to take responsibility and, like, manage the lube situation. Sorry, it makes me sound like a bit of a naff, but we got to Phuket years ago. We landed in Phuket and we came through customs, and then we looked at each other and Rob said, "There's no lube." And I was like, you know, we're here for a week. It's going to be a fair bit. There was going to be a fair bit of holiday sex. So then we had to go to a chemist in Thailand and try and ask for lube in Thai. I mean, we got there, but with some charades. But anyway, so you've got to have lubrication, whether it's integral through estrogen or bought in from the pharmacy. Yeah, lube is your friend. It's messy, it's clunky, it's not very romantic, but I've got to tell you, it works. Yeah, it absolutely works. The second thing that you've got to have as a woman for penetrative intercourse is a relaxed vagina, okay? If you are anxious, if you are worried about pain, if you are worried about the experience, about whether it's going to work for you or work for your partner, then you are probably going to have some sort of level of anxiety, and with anxiety comes muscle tension. And the muscle tension ain't just in your fingers, it's everywhere. And if your vagina is tense, I don't have to tell you how hard it is to put something into a tense space, all right? So this is where foreplay and recognising that how you used to do things before cancer might not be how you do things after cancer is a really important thing. I will not bore you with the details, but Rob and I have a different foreplay routine than we had before cancer. Before cancer, it was pretty quick. Now it's not so quick because my vagina has to get relaxed, and that takes a while. Because I'm worried about all of those things. I'm worried about pain, I'm worried about whether it's going to work, I'm worried about whether he really loves me, whether he really likes the fact that I don't have any boobs, you know, all of that stuff. So we have learned. The other thing that we did, again, I wasn't going to too much information, but like whatever, is we bought a tiny little vibrator. So a lot of vibrators are enormous, like quite off-putting in my mind. And I did a bit of research. God knows what my algorithms on my Google would look like, but anyway. And I came across this vibrator that I call the Honey Bunny, and it's the size of a lip balm. I'm not kidding, it's that small. It's got 10 settings, the battery's like microscopic. I bought it, it cost $30. I thought I'll get that back on my tax. And and I have. And that is a big part of our foreplay. It relaxes my vagina, and then we can have penetrative sex. Without that, not so successful. I'm not going to say that our sex life is anything like it was before cancer. It's just not, and we grieve that. But we haven't let that loss stop us from having a sex life. We've rebuilt a new sex life. It's different. I don't orgasm as often, and my engagement in sex is very conscious, it's very deliberate. If I waited for my physiological juices to flow, which is how most people engage in sex usually before cancer, if I waited for that to happen, I'd never have sex again, because that doesn't happen anymore. Thank you, endocrine treatment. So I have to kind of consciously go, it's like a manual setting instead of an automatic. I have to go, I want to have sex with Rob because I love him and our relationship is important and I want to feel that emotional and physical connection. I don't have the va-va boom that I used to have, but I've learnt that I can get enough of the va-va boom through the experience that makes it really, really, really worthwhile. Dual relationships. So dual relationships are a big part of the cancer experience when you have a partner. Overnight, you go from being partner and partner, husband and wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Overnight or in a moment, you go from having that relationship to having that relationship plus another relationship. And the other relationship is patient-carer. Nobody tells you that's going to happen. You don't get to put in an application, vet, hire, screen out the duds. You don't get to do any of that. You just suddenly have to deal with the fact that you've got two relationships instead of where there was one. This can bring up some issues because if you had, let's just say, a red hat for when you were husband and wife and a white hat for when you were patient and carer, and you swap the hats over when you were talking to each other, well, that would be fine because you'd kind of be able to know. There'd be a signal, there'd be a cue of like, how will I relate to this other person? But what often happens is the wires get crossed. So I'll give you an example. During treatment, if Rob said to me, husband to wife, I really love your veal parmigiana, darling. Could you make me the veal parmigiana? As his wife, I'd say, sure, darling. Get right on that. God, I'm a saint. As his patient, I would say, are you joking? Now, if he's come to that interaction thinking I'm going to be his wife, but I've come to the interaction as his patient, you can see how the wires get crossed, and you can see how what would be a kind of fairly normal interaction outside of cancer can suddenly become quite clunky. And so it can set up discord and miscommunication where there wasn't. And sometimes people can't even figure out why this is even happening. So just appreciating that dual relationships is a whole thing can be helpful. Maybe I should make red and white hats. The sandwich generation. So the sandwich generation is a phrase that I coined for particularly women who are often dealing with, at the time they get diagnosed, they're dealing with children, sometimes little kids, sometimes adolescents, sometimes adult children, and also ageing parents. So it's like they're in this time of life, often the middle time of their life, where they've got all of these obligations, and those obligations don't just get up and leave just because you get a breast cancer diagnosis. They all still have to be there. And women are socialised around keeping everybody else comfortable, making sure that everything stays as normal as possible. That comes at an enormous cost to themselves. And people going through, I cannot tell you how many clients I have who come in the early stages of treatment and say, I just want to make sure that everything stays okay, the same for my kids and for my parents. And I'm like, well, we probably need to massage some of those expectations because that's a really hard ask. Recognising that you might be one of the sandwich generation and making some small adjustments to expectations of yourself, educating other people about what's realistic, maybe even some boundary setting can be really important in just navigating through that space. For early breast cancer, a lot of this stuff can be temporary, where for months we just need to make some concessions, if there's a bit more screen time or a few more takeaways, or I don't visit mum and dad every second day, maybe it's just once a week. That stuff can be accommodated for a while, and people are sometimes more flexible than we give them credit. Body image issues, huge. So in Western culture, pre-cancer, nothing to do with cancer, women, about 91% of women have got some issue with their weight and shape. So that's well away from cancer. So just even before you ever get a cancer diagnosis, probably most of us have got something that you're kind of not that thrilled about. Then you get cancer and you have treatment, and suddenly it's like the changes to your body. Cancer acts as like a lightning rod for your focus and your distress. It gives you something to really zero in on. So whereas before it might have been like, I'm not just quite that happy with how I look. Now it's like, well, I really don't like my chest, or I really don't like my scars, or I really don't like my lymphedema. And we feel very conscious about it, and it can influence our mood and even our behaviours. If you think about across your life before you are ever diagnosed and have any body image changes, every time you look in a reflective surface, your brain takes like a little photograph and it puts that photograph in a file in your brain, and that file is labelled, "This is what I look like." And after cancer treatment, when you look in the mirror, sometimes what you see doesn't match those thousands of photos in the file in your brain called "This is what I look like." And that sets up this thing called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is where your brain's trying to hold two ideas in its head at the one time, and they're sort of smashing against each other, because one side of your brain's going, "This is what I look like," and the other side of your brain that's looking in the mirror is going, "No, this is what I look like." With body image, because of the discomfort of what we feel we look like, we often avoid. We can do gaze avoidance, which is where we don't look at how we appear. We can do touch avoidance, which is where we don't touch it. And we can do third person avoidance, which is where we don't let anybody else look or touch. One of the things that I get people to do, and nobody likes this to begin with, is to start to challenge that avoidance behaviours. And I do this myself. So I stand in front of the mirror every morning because I've had a double mastectomy, no recon, so I've got a flat chest and a big scar. So I stand in front of the mirror every morning, just look at my chest for about 10 seconds. Doesn't sound very long, it's actually really quite a long time. And because it's been like 5.5 years now, I've got now lots and lots and lots of images in my brain that say that's what I look like. So if you think before cancer, I probably had, I don't know, let's just go 1 million images of "This is what Charlotte looks like." And then after cancer, I had kind of no new images. What I've been doing by that little exercise every morning is I've been increasing the images of the new Charlotte. Get me? So doing things like that challenges the avoidance, but it also increases the speed that we adjust. If we avoid, the adjustment takes longer. Lots and lots of triggers for body image. Being naked or near naked, swimming, going to the beach, lots of sporting activities. So all those good things that like make you feel good can also make you feel a bit shit. Medical appointments, showers and baths, intimacy and sex, shopping for clothes, oh my lord, I'll talk about that in a minute. Massage or personal care appointments, again, things that like would traditionally kind of like make you feel good, then suddenly are loaded up with a whole lot of other feelings. Clothing, you know, I had this beautiful grey ribbed wool dress. Oh, I held on to it for like 2 years. I kept bringing it out and then I'd put it on and the V would go down below my scar, and then I'd take it off again, but I couldn't make myself throw it out, and then eventually I threw it out and felt so much better. Social media, oh God, I love Instagram, but like seriously. Reflective surfaces. But the other trigger, I don't know why I haven't put it up there, is everybody else's breasts. When I watch TV, I'm like, oh my God, all I can see is boobs. Freaking everywhere.
That's what I saw the other day.
Yeah.
My husband walked along, we both saw it, and his bird had boobs.
Boobs, yeah.
And I noticed, he looked at it, and I just went,
What the, yeah, and that's worse too, because it's like not just you noticing the boobs, but you noticing him noticing the boobs. Yeah. So this is me in a fitting room, and I took this photograph because I look pretty relaxed there, don't I? I look so calm, so chilled out. I was having a panic attack. Then I was having a panic attack. I wanted to buy that blouse, and I'd researched it online, and I got into the fitting room and I put it on, and it looks pretty good. And I was conscious of the fact that I was in fight and flight and I just needed to get out. But I was also conscious that I am very interested, obviously, in all this nonsense. I was just interested in the fact that what was going on inside me versus what I looked like was completely different. And I knew that if someone saw me, they'd be like, oh, you know, she's fine. I was so not fine. So not fine. The snow globe effect. #OneJob. I was meant to bring with me the tiny little snow globe to illustrate this point. So you just have to use your imaginations. A lot of you would have been to a little tourist outlet if you've ever been travelling anywhere, and you could see little snow globes. They're like little water-filled globes, and they have a little landscapey thing inside, and when you shake them up, the snow globes all kind of swirl around, okay? So this is an analogy for what happens with cancer. So the snow globe is your life, and when you get a cancer diagnosis, it shakes up your life, and all the little snowflakes are your values and priorities, and when they settle, None of them settle where they were before. So things that used to matter don't matter anymore, and things that didn't matter before sometimes matter now. I realised this when I had my own psychological meltdown after treatment. And initially I thought it was really cool. I was like, oh, isn't it great? You kind of work out all your shit, you kind of work out like what really matters, you kind of go, I'm just not going to worry about all that crap, and I'm going to like focus on the things that really matter. I'm going to live this like really streamlined, cool life. Yes, except that it didn't really fit. Like I was ready to sell up and pack up and leave, and my husband's like, whoa, calm down. And I'm like, no, I've got one life and I've got a second chance and I've got to do it differently. And he's like, yeah, I know, but we've got bills to pay and children and dogs and things. So could you just slow down? So what I realised about the snow globe effect is it's really cool. It's really cool because it does give you this kind of license and this motivation and clarity about like how you want to live your life. But I also think it's a bit of a superpower, and you do need to use it wisely, and you need to appreciate that what you now might suddenly find very meaningful and important is all very well, but you also need to see how well it fits with the framework of your life. And if it does fit, lovely. And if it doesn't fit, then it doesn't mean don't do it, but it does mean appreciate that it mightn't be quite as seamless or quick as you want it to be. So, like I said, increased clarity, increased willingness to prioritise your own needs. Just go back to that. It's different for everybody. In my case, I changed my work hours. So I used to work 5 days a week. Now I work 3 days a week, 8 till 6. They're big days, but mate, it's really good. I've got a really good work-life balance. I've got time to do things that I love. I've got time to do things like this with BCNA. And I've got time to sleep and exercise and spend time with the people that matter to me, and it feels good, but it was a rocky road to get there. I say no to a lot of stuff that I don't want to do. I do things a lot, and I don't make excuses for it anymore. I just do them, just like, well, if they're important to me, then they need to get done, and they need to get done as a priority, because I don't know if anything else is going to happen, and if it does, I do not want regret. So I talked about post-treatment adjustment before. 2 years starts at the end of hospital-based treatment. Imagine that this is your lifeline. That's the moment of diagnosis. That's your pre-cancer life. That's your post-cancer life. In your pre-cancer life, we call that your normal life. Your post-cancer life is your new normal life. Now, a lot of people don't like the words new normal. You can come up with whatever you like. Charlotte 2.0, next chapter of you, it doesn't matter. The idea is that you don't go back to normal. There is no going back to normal. It's a complete fallacy. Not one person goes back to normal. If you think about what cancer does to you and what cancer treatment does to you at a cellular level, you are a different person. So it is about acknowledging that and about creating the new normal. In your pre-cancer normal life, we all have a bunch of expectations, standards and behaviours that work really nicely, but without realising it, we often drag those into our post-cancer life. We have high expectations of ourselves and others, and unfortunately, if we don't change those, it sets us up for feelings of frustration, disappointment and failure. Women are particularly vulnerable to this because we often are the butter in the sandwich. We're the thing that keeps life rolling along. We are socialised around keeping the show on the road, about looking after everybody else. And we can take those very high expectations about making sure that everything's kind of okay and all the wheels on the bus keep going. We can take those into our post-cancer life. And what we fail to do is recognise that cancer leaves a mark on your lifeline like nothing else. It just does. And if we fail to recognise that, then all we're doing is going to be constantly bumping up against the fact that I used to be able to do these things to a certain speed or standard or in a certain duration, and now I can't, and I'm frustrated. That's what happened to me. I went back to work. I thought, I'm going to be different. Not like my clients. I'm going to be different. What a load of crap. And I fell in a really big hole because I am different. And I needed to make space in my life for that difference. And that was a hard thing to come to grips with. Adjustment is a time-based process. It does come with time, but it also sometimes needs a little bit of help. fear of cancer recurrence is a beauty. So I get a lot of oncologists and surgeons say to me, Charlotte, like, can't we get rid of fear of cancer recurrence, which is, of course, the fear that the cancer is going to come back. And I say that I'm going to be a big disappointment to you because, no, can't get rid of it. The research tells us that between 70 to 99% of people who've had a cancer experience have fear of cancer recurrence. So it is normal. It is filthy, but it is normal. So if you fear cancer returning, then you're meant to. I put fear of cancer recurrence in the same kind of basket, it sounds very weird, but in the same kind of basket as being fearful in a war situation or being fearful in a domestic violence situation. You are meant to be scared of cancer. It's an existential threat. It can take your life. So if I have clients from time to time who say, no, I'm not worried about it coming back, that's actually a red flag to me. You are meant to be scared of it. Now, degrees of, yeah? We don't want to be disabled by the fear of cancer recurrence. We don't want to be debilitated by it. But it is important to recognise that it is actually normal and it isn't going to go away. So part of adjusting in this new normal is about finding a way to make room for it, to get to know it. I call fear of cancer recurrence a bit like an uninvited dinner party guest. You know, you weren't invited, but you're here now, so you may as well pull up a chair and let me get to know you. So fear of the cancer is feeling anxious about the cancer coming back. Stats. These are the triggers. So diagnosis. As soon as we diagnose, we start thinking about whether it's going to come back. New treatment phase. So every time we start a new treatment phase, we wonder, is this going to work? And if it does, good. But if it doesn't, what does that mean about cancer coming back? The death or diagnosis of a friend or a family member, maybe through cancer, but often through, other things as well. It takes that idea of something bad happening to something bad happening. Cancer anniversaries, for some people it might be diagnosis, some people it might be like date of surgery, date of the date that treatment ended, varies by person. Media stories, there are so many media stories. Now the media stories might be about, the release of a new drug, it might be a good news story, it might be about the death of Olivia Newton-John. There are media stories about cancer all the time. It's hard to escape. Medical reviews, whether they are scheduled or if they are in reaction to a symptom, either way, usually a trigger. And the big one, physical symptoms. So the top 6 are kind of like here, and physical symptoms as a trigger is kind of there, yeah? Physical symptoms sometimes are about us noticing a symptom that might kind of logically relate to cancer, like maybe a lump, but actually, in my experience, it can kind of be anything. It can be a change in bodily function, it could be a rash or a headache or a bone pain, it could be anything. What we tend to do with fear of cancer recurrence is the first thought is often the worst thought. So when we recognise that there's a symptom, our brain goes, the cancer's back. Yeah? I live with fear of recurrence. I will tell you a story about that in a minute. So it's very common that we have this interpretation of the physical symptom as linked to cancer. And when people say to me, I want to stop that, I say to them, yeah, well, we're not going to stop that thought because we don't get to control our thoughts. If I say to you, there's a pink elephant in the corner of the room and I don't want you to think about the pink elephant, what are you going to think about? Pink elephant. Even trying not to think about the pink elephant is in fact thinking about the pink elephant. So if we try to not think about that symptom and it's not cancer and all of that, well, that doesn't work. So I say, let yourself have that explanation and then challenge yourself to come up with 2 other explanations for the same symptom. So let's just go with a headache. If I get a headache straight away, brain mets, instantly, right? So then I go, righto, fair enough, could be brain mets. What else could it be? Well, I'm routinely dehydrated, never drink enough water, so could be dehydration. I'm also fairly often tired and stressed, so could be that. And then I go, okay, of those 3, probability analysis, what's most likely? On a given day, probably dehydration, to be fair. And as soon as I've done that 3 explanations for the same event, what I've effectively done is I've spread my fear. So if I just put all of my fear eggs, if I've got 100 fear eggs and I put them all in the brain mets basket, that's a very powerful fear. If I spread those fear eggs 33, 33, 34 into 3 baskets, brain mets, dehydration, stressed and tired, then I've diluted the fear. And I've also started to engage my rational brain. And my rational brain is protective. We all have 2 brains. We have our rational mind and our emotional mind. Our emotional mind is the anxiety, the fear of recurrence. My rational mind is going, well, I mean, it could be brain mets, but it could be dehydration and it could be stressed and tired. Then I say, monitor sensibly for 2 weeks. I used to say 2 weeks up until yesterday, and I'll tell you why. But monitor sensibly for 2 weeks. And then if it's not getting better or if it's getting worse, then go and get it checked out. So that's my strategising around fear of recurrence. But events in the last couple of weeks have been interesting. I'm fine, so nothing dire. However, 3 weeks ago today, we got home from work and the shower screen in our bathroom had smashed randomly. I still don't know how, but that doesn't matter. There was glass everywhere. So at 8 o'clock at night in my work clothes, I was vacuuming glass, and it was a lot of glass. And so I was kind of in weird physical positions and vacuuming, what have you. Anyway, nothing hurt, nothing happened. I just remember that was an event. Anyway, woke up the next morning with a really sore scapula here. And my brain initially went, oh, vacuuming, pain, that's probably what it was. And then fairly quickly in crept the bone met. And for about a week, I could do my strategy that I just described then. I could do the 3 explanations, and I was kind of like, you know, in my mind, it's vacuuming at a weird time of night in a weird position, you know, that's going to be what it is. But it didn't get better. And in fact, I think it got worse. And I took a lot of pain medication that upset my stomach. So then I just stopped that, and then it really got worse. So we got into the 2nd week now, and all of my strategising deserted me. And I was absolutely convinced, I'm not kidding here, I was absolutely convinced it was bone metastases. And of course I'm Dr. Googling, which we should never do, but I was Dr. Googling. And Robin and I were having, as we have in the past, we were having this could be our last trip to Malaysia, and are we going to get Harriet back from London? And all of those big, gnarly conversations. And I was really, really, really scared. Like really, really, really scared. And what I've learned from this exercise was I waited too long, because I sat in that fear until Monday of this week. So I sat in that particular fear for 10 days. I had a week of kind of like it was fine. Then I had 10 days of really high level pain and absolute what I would call terror. And then I went to the GP and the physio on Monday, and I've got a bulging disc in my neck, which is obviously dreadful but magnificent at the same time. And I could have got that news 10 days earlier if I wasn't so caught up in my own crap about like, you know, no, don't overreact, and you're being, you know, like la. Anyway, so my message to you is, on the one hand, we don't want to jump at shadows, because if we jumped at every shadow, we'd be at the GP every week spending a fortune and too much time and energy. But on the other hand, 2.5 weeks plus was too long, and I had not really experienced that before. So for me, I've decided that probably the optimal kind of time, if something isn't settling down, is somewhere early in the 2nd week. That's when you want to do something about it. Is this weird thing between, you know, I don't want to be a hypochondriac, but I don't want to then let that push me into complacency either, because a bulging disc is not a small thing. And I now have an MRI scan and a whole lot of medication and a physio who knows what she's doing, and I feel 9,000 times better than I did last week, and like a complete twit. So learn from my experience. Oh, that's just me in a scanning machine. So anxiety and fear of recurrence has a bad reputation, and that's what I was saying about oncologists and surgeons wanting us to get rid of it. I did this exercise with them recently at a conference. I should have brought this slide, but anyway, I'll describe it. If you think about those triggers that I just described, there were 6 and then physical symptoms, so a total of 7. If you take away diagnosis that only kind of happens the once, the other 6, you're going to have at least a couple of them every year. You're going to have a couple of physical symptoms, you're going to have a couple of medical reviews, you're going to have a couple of like things, big things in media, so on and so forth. It's not hard to get to 10 triggers in a year. 10 triggers in a year is a trigger every 5 weeks. So when you start to understand that, you start to understand no wonder that fear of recurrence is kind of always lingering. I never really seem to get it completely go away, because it won't. So fear has a bad reputation. Like I said before, we want the right amount of fear of recurrence. We want enough fear of recurrence that you go to the doctor sooner, and we don't want so much fear of recurrence that you are debilitated by it. There's a very small proportion, and in my client load, I would only ever have 1 or 2 of these clients at a time, like across a several month period, where they are going to a different specialist or their oncologist literally every week or 2, demanding scans or bloods because they are so debilitated by their fear of recurrence. That is at a severe level of fear of recurrence. It is uncommon. Most people are like me, where it peaks and then it settles down. If you're waiting for results of any sort of investigation or you're dealing with a lingering physical symptom, it will go up and it will stay up for longer before it settles down. So not too much, not too little, just the right amount, Goldilocks fear. Use fear as a motivator. A long time ago, I was like, well, if you can't get rid of this pesky thing, can you make it work for you? And so I kind of use fear as a motivator, particularly around healthy lifestyle behaviours. So things like exercise, nutrition, sleep. I'm like pretty mental about those things. But also about living, about cracking on and doing the stuff I want to do. I'm like, well, you know, if that fear's there, and truthfully, you know, none of our medical team can give us that rolled gold ironclad guarantee that nothing bad is ever going to happen again. Well, let's use that for good. So in summary, today I've talked about the psychological as well as the physical impact of a breast cancer diagnosis, the fact that it has a long tail, and the role of anxiety, adjustment and support in all of that. It's really important to get good support, go to where you're understood, empathetic others, your GP, your breast care nurse or a therapist. And if you want to listen to me crap on a bit more, you can listen to podcast Series 1 and podcast Series 2. We have downloaded 121,000 listens and the feedback is, I do sound like a knob, but you know, universally positive, so it's helpful. And I would like to take questions if there are any.
Time for a couple of questions. So just in front of you, Anna.
Hello.
Hello.
My name's Julie, and
Hi,
I
Julie.
hope this question is not too personal.
Ask away.
Was it your choice to have a double mastectomy, or was it your choice? Like, was it just necessary for one breast and not 2, and you went ahead and had 2?
So, Mum and Dad died of cancer in my 20s. Mum had ovarian and Dad had bowel, and all 4 of my grandparents had died of cancer. So I was diagnosed at 54, and we hadn't done genetic testing because, weirdly, when I was in my early 30s, we asked the genetic department, do you think this qualifies? And they said, no. And then I went on to get cancer. So, yeah, put that one in the hat. Anyway, my surgeon knew my history, and he was suspicious that I might have the BRCA gene. I'd already had my ovaries out when I was, and my hysterectomy and an oophorectomy when I was 31. And so he said, look, if you're comfortable with a double mastectomy, that's going to be very protective. I had very small breasts, like AAA. So really. So as weird as this sounds, and this is a completely false thought, but I didn't think I'd be losing much. That is a ridiculous thought, because on reflection, my breasts were epic and I should have, anyway, not that I should have kept them, but I was a little cavalier about, like, you know, it'll be fine. So it wasn't fine. But I am so pleased because I feel very safe. I am a symmetrical person. You know, I live in the Adelaide Hills and grapevines are my thing. Not to great, but because of the lines. So the idea that I would have had asymmetry would not have worked for me at all. Also, when they did the surgery, they found more cancer than they thought, or that they could see on the scan. So it was completely borne out afterwards. But we did find, in fact, that I don't have the BRCA gene. So, yeah. But anyway, so I hope that answers your question.
Got time for one more question? Can I just ask one then? The conversation, if you're not happy with your treating team.
Get a new treating team.
Or how do you start that conversation to begin a better flow of communication?
So it's a tricky space. It's easy to say get a new treating team. It's actually quite hard to do. And I think also that interpersonal interactions, so that stuff that happens when you're sitting in front of a doctor or a medical specialist, and things like distress and anxiety and everything that's going on in your life, as well as, believe me, everything that's going on in their lives, sometimes are worth a second chance. If you give them a second chance, and to give someone a second chance can mean an uncomfortable conversation, and we are not socialised around uncomfortable conversations. Like, I actually think we should have practice at uncomfortable conversations in primary schools. I'm not kidding. Like, I think we really need to get better at this stuff. But if you feel like I'm not feeling heard, or I'm feeling confused, or I'm feeling like there's more information that I'm not getting access to, whatever it is, try and identify what it is you have a need that is not being met, and then write it down. Because in the moment, sitting in front of someone, you can have a magnificent plan, you can have it all rehearsed about what I'm going to say to Dr. X, and then we're going to, you know, do this whole thing. And then something happens and the whole thing goes out the window. If you write it down, like even if it's just 1 or 2 dot points, and you take that piece of paper with you, it's a couple of things. One, it's preparation, and that always leads to better results. But the other thing is, if you put a piece of paper down on a desk and it's got a couple of dot points on it, it says a few things. It says, I mean business. It says, I've thought about this. I've got things that I need to be addressed before I leave here today. If it's only got a couple of dot points, it says, I'm not going to be here all afternoon, which is also helpful. And then if you're feeling overwhelmed, you can actually slide that piece of paper across the desk and say, these are my concerns. Would it be all right if we had a chat about them? Sometimes doing that process in an appointment that is specifically for that purpose can be really helpful. If you are just going in for a standard review or a standard treatment appointment, and then you're trying to thread in a conversation about your therapeutic relationship, that can be tricky because you can blindside your clinician, they can be time poor, you can leave feeling kind of a bit disappointed or pissed off. If you ring their admin team and say, I'd like a separate appointment and I'd like to talk to Dr. X about our therapeutic relationship, quite often they come with a kind of their own headset, a bit prepared, and they're not looking at like results and files, they're looking at you. If you give them that second chance and you still don't get what you need, then you need to talk to other people in your treatment team or other people around you and think about where else you might like to go. Second opinions are not uncommon. Let's not kid ourselves, the medical fraternity all know each other, but they are pretty used to it, and a lot of them welcome second opinions. They don't want their clients or their patients to be unhappy. So, you know, if there's a better fit, then they'll endorse that.
Please thank Charlotte.